Her sister exposed her $12.6 million fortune at Thanksgiving, and what followed shattered every illusion of family love. Betrayal, greed, and a quiet strength no one saw coming. This isn't just a story about money. It's about finally choosing yourself after a lifetime of being overlooked. You won't believe how it ends. Where are you watching from? Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that speaks truth to the heart. When I was a little girl, I thought my family was perfect. My name is Elaine Carter. I was born in a quiet Minnesota town where the winters stretched long and the lakes stayed frozen like mirrors of silence. My world was simple. Dad was a high school chemistry teacher. Mom worked nights as a nurse, and I was their only child. Every Sunday, we'd eat French toast on the porch, wrapped in thick wool sweaters, watching birds skim across the icy lake. Dad used to let me stir the pancake batter, even when I made a mess. Mom brushed my hair every evening before her shift, humming some old folk tune her mother taught her. I didn't know much about the world, but I knew I was loved. That changed the night my little sister was born. It was January. I had just turned 8, and the wind howled outside like it was trying to tear the roof off our house. I remember the knock, loud, fast, and frantic. Then the headlights of Aunt Marine's car lighting up the snow-covered driveway like searchlights. She came in without taking off her boots, snow dripping onto the rug. Her face was pale and tight. "Grab your coat, honey," she said, trying to smile. "You're coming with me." I didn't understand. I asked if I could bring my sketch pad, and she said, "Sure, baby," like her voice had lost its air. Later, I learned Chloe had arrived too soon, 2 months early. She was red and tiny, curled like a shrimp, her body lined with wires and tubes, lying in a glass box that beeped with every breath. I wanted to see her. I wanted to hold her. I even brought her a drawing of a blue rabbit I'd made. But Mom just looked at me, her eyes fixed on the monitor. "We can't risk her getting sick," she said, and when I reached out, she pulled her hand away like I had the plague. From that moment on, everything changed. Our house turned into something else. Less home, more hospital. Bottles of sanitizer lined the countertops. Air purifiers hummed all day. The smell of bleach clung to the walls. My room became the only space untouched, but that was only because Chloe was allergic to peppermint, and Mom used that scent to keep her away. I wasn't told this directly. I heard it one night through the vent, Mom whispering to Dad, "Elaine's room triggers Chloe's asthma. We should keep them apart." So they did. Every cough, every sneeze, every stomach bug set me straight to Grandma's house. At first, I didn't mind. Grandma baked the best apple pies and let me read mystery novels in her sunroom. But as the visit stretched longer, I began to understand I wasn't being sent away for my health. I was being removed from theirs. I started noticing things. My drawings no longer made the fridge. My test scores were brushed aside. I remember coming home with a 100 on my first third-grade math test. I handed it to Mom while she was chopping carrots for Chloe's soup. She glanced at it, said, "Good," then turned to ask Dad if he had remembered the vapor rub. Dad smiled at me, a tired, distant smile. "Good job, kiddo," he said, without putting down his phone. That was the end of it. I started fading into the corners of the house. I learned to tiptoe. I whispered my thoughts into pages of notebooks. I stopped talking during dinner because everything I said got interrupted by a Chloe update. "She's learning to crawl," she said her first word, her skin rashes finally clearing up. When I told Mom I'd won first place at the science fair, she said, "That's nice, Elaine, but Chloe's been really sensitive to sound lately. Try not to get too excited." By age 10, I understood the rules. Rule 1, don't make noise. Rule 2, don't expect applause. Rule 3, don't compete with Chloe. But still, I tried. I tried so hard. I made paper flower bouquets for Mom's nightstand. I wrote poems about snowflakes. I memorized facts about stars so I could share them at dinner. But every effort got buried beneath 1,000 tiny concerns about Chloe's health. Elaine, she has a mild fever. Elaine, she's napping. Elaine, she needs calm. I began to shrink. It wasn't until I overheard Mom talking to a neighbor that something inside me cracked. She was outside, sipping tea with Mrs. Crowley, when I heard her say, "Elaine's always been independent. It's her nature. She understands Chloe needs more attention." No, I didn't. I didn't understand at all. What I understood was that love had become a limited resource. and I was no longer on the list. The worst part wasn't being ignored. It was being redefined. My childhood wasn't erased, it was rewritten. They started saying things like, "Elaine's strong," when what they meant was Elaine's forgotten. They told others I was self-sufficient, when really, I was just starved of affection. And the more they convinced themselves I didn't need love, the more they let themselves withhold it. By the time I was 12, I had stopped asking for hugs. Instead, I started working. There was a bakery in town called Morning Crumbs, run by an older woman named Mrs. Donnelly. She had silver hair and wrists stacked with bangles that clinked when she moved. I walked in one day, asked if she needed help, and she just nodded. "Can you mop floors and smile at rude customers?" I said yes. That was all it took. After school, I'd head straight there. I wiped down counters, boxed pastries, and memorized the smell of rising dough. At home, no one asked where I was. No one noticed the flour in my hair or the sugar on my sleeves. Mrs. Donnelly did. One evening, she handed me a box of leftover scones and said, "You've got something in you, kid. Some people shine quiet but bright." It was the first time I cried in months, not the loud kind, just quiet tears that tasted like cinnamon and release. I started saving money in a mason jar I kept under my bed. I didn't know what it was for, but it felt like hope. A ticket out, a future. At night, while Chloe practiced violin downstairs and Mom hummed along, I'd sit at my tiny desk in the corner of my room and draw. Not for anyone, not for praise, just for myself. And somewhere in that peppermint-scented isolation, I made a promise I wouldn't forget. If no one ever saw me again, I'd make sure the world would. By the time I turned 13, I was no longer waiting for anyone to notice me. I had learned the rhythm of invisibility, the way silence could become a shield and solitude, a kind of strength. While Chloe was celebrated for every small accomplishment, her first solo at the school recital, her papier-mâché volcano that didn't even erupt, I worked the afternoon shift at Morning Crumbs, rolling up my sleeves and learning to exist on the edges of everyone else's world. The bakery became more than a job. It was my sanctuary. Mrs. Donnelly taught me more than how to fold pastry dough. She taught me how to listen, how to pay attention to the quiet details most people ignored, how the sugar granules changed color when caramelized just right, how to fold parchment to keep cookies from burning, how to spot someone hurting just by the way they cradled their coffee cup. She never asked why I needed the work. She just gave me space to grow. I started reading antique recipe books on my breaks, copying notes into a spiral-bound notebook I kept in my apron pocket. I didn't talk much at school, but I'd whisper to old cookbooks like they were friends who kept secrets just for me. When other kids went to summer camp or the water park, I was cleaning mixers and learning how to turn a bruised peach into the star of a pie. At home, nothing changed. Mom was always tired, Dad was always elsewhere. Physically present, but mentally tuned into Chloe's routines, her tutors, her asthma checkups. They said things like, "Elaine's so mature for her age," but what they meant was, we've forgotten how to be there for her. Once during dinner, Chloe complained that she needed a new laptop for school. She was tired of sharing. Mom sighed dramatically and promised they'd figure something out, even though we were already behind on mortgage payments. I'd been using the public library's computers to write my school essays for months, riding my bike in the snow just to get them in on time. No one asked how I managed. No one asked if I needed help. But I never let that stop me. I started researching colleges when I was 15, not just the glossy pamphlets they handed out at school, but deep dives into scholarship databases, FAFSA forms, and private grants hidden like gold in forgotten corners of the internet. I made a spreadsheet. I built a calendar. I didn't have a guidance counselor who cared, so I became my own. Every application felt like a tiny rebellion, every essay a secret declaration of self-worth. Mrs. Donnelly became my editor. She'd stay late after closing, red pen in hand, glasses sliding down her nose, helping me shape my thoughts into something sharp and sincere. "Write like you're already where you want to be," she said once. "People will believe it." I took those words to heart. I told no one at home. Not when I got invited to a regional essay competition. Not when I was selected as a finalist for a science fellowship. Not even when I was flown to Chicago for an interview with Northwestern University's Advanced Humanities program. I scraped together bus fare with bakery tips, packed a ham sandwich in wax paper, and traveled alone in the middle of winter, my coat too thin and my fingers trembling more from hope than cold. And then, on a quiet spring afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the bakery windows and the scent of lemon glaze filled the air, I got the email. I'd been accepted to Northwestern. Full ride. The world seemed to hold its breath. I stared at the screen, rereading it over and over like it might disappear. Then I laughed, really laughed, and dropped to my knees behind the counter. My eyes blurred. I didn't cry often back then, but that day the tears came like rain after a drought. Mrs. Donnelly rushed in from the kitchen, thinking I'd burned myself. When I told her, she hugged me so tightly I thought my bones would crack. "I knew it," she whispered. "You're meant for more, Elaine." That night, I brought the acceptance letter home, neatly folded, tucked into my back pocket like it was a fragile secret. I waited until after dinner, when Mom was loading the dishwasher and Dad was watching a documentary on migration patterns. I slid it onto the counter. "I got into Northwestern," I said, "with a full scholarship." Mom glanced at it, eyebrows barely lifting. "That's nice, honey," she said, drying her hands. "But let's not tell Chloe yet. She's been really stressed this week. Her skin's flaring up again." I waited for a second, just 1 second, for someone to say, "Congratulations." No one did. I picked the letter back up, folded it quietly, and walked upstairs to the peppermint-scented room I had made my world. Weeks later, the whole family threw a party for Chloe because she won second place in an art contest at school. She had drawn a purple squirrel with glitter glue. Dad framed it. Mom made cupcakes. There were balloons. I stood in the corner, smiling, clapping, pretending it didn't sting. No one mentioned my letter. No one asked when I was leaving. But I didn't need their permission. I'd already built a life without their help. When the summer came, I packed up what little I had, thrift store suitcases, a few clothes, and a worn-out notebook filled with scholarship deadlines. Mrs. Donnelly gave me a care package, a thermos of black tea, a recipe card for peach tart, and a handwritten note that said, "Keep rising, even dough does." I didn't cry when I left home. I cried later in my tiny dorm room, under fluorescent lights that buzzed like mosquitoes, surrounded by students whose parents helped them unpack and hugged them goodbye. I cried because I knew I would never have that. But I also knew something else. I had made it here, on my own. And even if no one clapped, no one cried happy tears, and no one waved from the porch as I drove away, I had become something more than invisible. I had become unbreakable. College was the first place where I learned to breathe. Not in the shallow, cautious way I had learned at home. Quiet breaths, invisible movements, but full, expanding inhales that didn't require permission. My dorm at Northwestern was small, shared, and constantly smelled like someone's leftover ramen, but to me it was a palace. I decorated my corner with postcards of classic paintings, printed out in grainy ink from the library. Botticelli's Venus, Klimt's Adele, Rembrandt's self-portraits, they weren't just images. They were companions. Silent, familiar, rich with stories no one had time to listen to, like me. I majored in art history, a choice no one in my family would have understood. I didn't tell them. They assumed I was studying something useful. My mother once asked if I'd considered nursing since you're already so used to helping others. I nodded and changed the subject. Classes were intense. I was surrounded by students whose parents were donors, alumni, or just deeply involved. People who had grown up going to gallery openings and knew the difference between Rococo and Baroque before they hit puberty. I didn't. But I studied harder. I took notes like I was transcribing scripture, stayed late in the campus museum to sketch the curve of forgotten sculptures, and spent nights researching the artisans whose names never made it to textbooks. While others networked, I built a secret map of knowledge. I didn't speak much in class at first, but when I did, professors listened. There was one course, Jewelry Through the Ages, that changed everything. It was taught by a visiting professor from London, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and sharper questions. She once held up a blurry photo of a tarnished pendant and asked, "What do you see?" Most students murmured guesses. I raised my hand. Tool marks along the clasp. Enamel likely added later. Restoration job, maybe late 1800s. But the base structure is earlier, mid-Georgian era, possibly mourning jewelry. She stared at me for a moment, then said, "Correct. Who taught you that? I wanted to say, loneliness. Instead, I just shrugged. I looked closely. She smiled like she understood. After that, she called on me more often. My junior year, I landed a highly competitive internship at a small antique appraisal firm in Chicago. It was unpaid, of course. Most of the prestigious ones were. I balanced work and study with the kind of quiet ferocity I'd learned from years of being unseen. Every morning I pulled on borrowed gloves, hunched over a magnifying lens, and cataloged rings, brooches, and forgotten hairpins that most appraisers didn't have time for. The other interns wanted to work on celebrity collections or museum exhibitions. I liked the misfits, the unmarked, the dusty, the doubted. I believed in hidden value, probably because I'd spent my whole life being misjudged. One afternoon, I was assigned a small tray labeled costume jewelry. It was the graveyard pile, pieces deemed worthless or too modern to matter. But one brooch caught my attention. It was delicate, with a curved design that looked like nothing special at first glance. But the closer I looked, the more something stirred. The edges were too refined, the enamel too flawless. On the back, nearly worn away, was a maker's mark, a crescent with 2 stars. I didn't recognize it, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, I stayed at the office, digging through archives and online databases, piecing together clues like a detective. Finally, I found it. The symbol belonged to a French artisan named Claude Bechet, a man who had designed exclusive pieces for minor nobility before his workshop was destroyed during World War I. The brooch was real and rare. I presented my findings at the Monday meeting, heart racing. I expected skepticism. Instead, silence. Then my supervisor, a stern woman named Margaret, nodded. "Well done," she said, and the brooch was sent for reappraisal. It sold for over $40,000 at a Seattle auction. It was the first time my name appeared in the company-wide email. Just one line. "Elaine Carter has an exceptional eye." I read it 3 times before I believed it. After that, the forgotten pieces began accidentally landing on my desk more often. A platinum wedding band marked as reproduction turned out to be a limited design from a Boston family's 100th anniversary. A necklace dismissed as costume? Actually, an original cloisonné work from 19th century Russia. I didn't say much. I just kept working. Each piece I authenticated felt like reclaiming a part of myself. I handled them with reverence, not because of their price tags, but because they had been overlooked, like me. And I knew how that felt. Their stories deserved to be told. I learned how to trust the weight of metal in my hand, how to feel the difference between machine and human crafting with my fingertips. Margaret took notice. One day, over a slice of blackberry tart during lunch, she looked at me and asked, "Ever thought about going solo?" I blinked. "Me? I still live off frozen dumplings and dollar coffee." She grinned. "Exactly. The hungriest people find the rarest meals." That sentence burrowed deep. I started taking small freelance gigs. Pawn shops, family jewelers, people who couldn't afford big appraisal firms but still wanted honesty. I charged low, but I did every job with surgical precision. I wrote reports that read like short stories, each piece given its full history, from maker to material to migration through time. When I moved into a shoebox apartment above a deli, no one from my family knew. They assumed I was still working in some office job, or maybe doing grad school stuff. No one asked. Not even when I began sending my parents $3,000 a month, then $5,000, and eventually $7,000. They never questioned where it came from. I didn't volunteer the information. It wasn't out of pride. It was because I had learned something far more painful than being ignored. Sometimes, the people closest to you don't want to know who you've become. They prefer the version of you they can manage. The version that doesn't challenge their neglect. The version that stays quiet, stays small, stays grateful for crumbs. But I was done with crumbs. I was learning how to feast, quietly, on my own. And every time I lifted a magnifying glass, I whispered the same thing to myself: "You are not what they said you were." I opened my business in the fall of my 27th year. It wasn't glamorous. There was no ribbon-cutting ceremony, no articles in local papers, no congratulatory phone calls from home. Just a rusty key, a second-hand desk, and a small sign on a fogged glass door that read, "Orem and Iris." The name came to me one night while I sat in my drafty apartment, sipping oversteeped tea and staring at a stack of authentication reports. Orem, Latin for gold, a nod to the hidden worth I had learned to recognize. And iris, the flower my mother once grew in our front yard before Chloe was born, before all the petals in our home quietly fell off. The office was a 300-square-foot corner on the third floor of a mostly forgotten Milwaukee building. One window barely opened. The other faced the alley behind an Italian cafe, which fortunately meant my tiny workspace always smelled like garlic and basil instead of mildew. My chair was salvaged from the curb. The desk wobbled unless you leaned slightly to the left. And the lamp? It buzzed every time I turned it on, as though it too was unsure about this whole dream thing. But it was mine. I started small. A widow with a tarnished locket wanted to know if it was real gold. A retired farmer brought in a brooch he'd found in his barn after his wife passed, curious if it had any value. These weren't million-dollar artifacts, they were time capsules. Each one told a story. Each one was worth listening to. And I did, with the kind of care that made even the simplest pieces feel royal. Word spread slowly. First a trickle, then a stream. Antique dealers who'd been burned by overconfident appraisers started calling. Estate lawyers needing quiet, discreet evaluations. Small museums with storage rooms full of maybe valuable items. I didn't charge like the big firms, but my reports were meticulous, footnoted, cross-referenced, backed by archival records, and instinct honed over years of feeling invisible. It turned out there was a market for someone who treated forgotten heirlooms like crown jewels. I was always working, nights, weekends, in between bites of deli sandwiches and lukewarm coffee. I invested in better tools, a digital microscope, specialized lighting, acid test kits. I created a filing system so detailed it would make a librarian weep. But still, no one in my family knew what I did. They didn't ask. To them, I was just Elaine, the daughter who refused to settle down, who always missed family dinners, who handled old stuff for a living. My mother once told a neighbor I was working in some warehouse job, and I didn't bother correcting her. It was easier that way. At the end of each month, I transferred money into my parents' account. It started as $3,000, a gesture to help with Chloe's school bills. Then $5,000, then $7,000 when Chloe suddenly found her calling in interior design, the same path I once dreamed of but couldn't afford to pursue because of her medical expenses. No one asked where the money came from. No one wondered how I could afford it. They just accepted it like they always had, like I owed it to them. And maybe for a while, I believed I did. Chloe, meanwhile, bounced from program to program: psychology, graphic design, journalism, culinary arts. Every time she quit, the family held a gentle, "We're just so proud of her for trying" dinner. There were speeches, there were hugs, there was dessert. When I sent Chloe a care package once, organic teas and a sketch pad she'd admired at a bookstore, she texted, "Thanks, but I don't really like peppermint anymore. Just fi." I didn't respond. She had posted a picture the same day, smiling in a rooftop bar with her new boyfriend, holding a designer clutch I recognized instantly. It was limited edition, no discounts, and no student at Parsons could afford it without outside help. That's when I realized something I'd been trying not to see. They weren't just ignoring me. They were living off me, quietly, entitled, without acknowledgement. And I was letting them. I thought about stopping the payments, but every time I hovered over the cancel button, something in me flinched. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the memory of being told to whisper while Chloe napped. Or maybe it was because part of me still wanted to be good, to be the daughter who gave without needing thanks, to be the one who didn't cause trouble. But beneath that, something else was growing, an ember, a quiet defiance, a need to no longer be the backup plan no one bothered to think. My company grew faster than I anticipated. By the end of my second year, I moved into a ground floor space, complete with glass doors and a real sign. People started recognizing my name. I hired an assistant, Maya, fresh out of a geology program, with the kind of bright, curious mind that reminded me of my own early days. I taught her how to spot hand tool marks, how to distinguish machine polish from artisan wear, and most importantly, how to trust her intuition. By year 5, Orem and Iris had 3 operating offices: Milwaukee, Minneapolis, and Denver. We were handling 6-figure contracts for private collections, rare estate evaluations, and even consulting on museum acquisitions. My personal net worth crossed $12 million. That didn't include another $1 million in pending contracts. But still I lived modestly. A small house, a neutral-toned SUV. My phone was 3 models behind, not because I couldn't afford better, but because I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I still showed up at Sunday dinners. I still listened to Mom talk about how Chloe had just switched her major for the 5th time, now, animal behavior psychology, and how she was really finding herself. Dad still asked if I'd considered applying for a job at the local high school, since they've got great benefits. Chloe still rolled her eyes at my secondhand jackets and called my work dusty old stuff. No one noticed the vintage ruby pin on my coat, a rare Edwardian piece I'd acquired at auction. No one asked why I was always taking calls in the middle of family gatherings, or why I sometimes stepped outside to answer emails at midnight. They assumed I was barely getting by. They whispered that I was too proud to ask for help. And I let them believe it, because I had learned something even rarer than rubies, even more valuable than gold. Silence, when wielded carefully, is power. And one day I knew that silence would break, not because I wanted it to, but because someone else, someone careless, would try to claim what they never earned. And when that day came, I wouldn't need to prove myself, because everything I built would speak louder than words ever could. I never planned to host Thanksgiving that year. In fact, I told myself I wouldn't go at all. I'd imagined slipping away to a quiet cabin somewhere, just me, a fireplace, and the company of a few antique pieces I was appraising for a New York client. No family tension, no forced small talk, no watching Chloe perform yet another new version of herself while everyone clapped like she'd just solved world hunger. But then Mom called. Her voice was soft, thinner than usual. "Elaine, I'm not feeling well. Your father's overwhelmed, and no one's really up to cooking this year. Everyone's looking forward to Thanksgiving. You know how it is." I knew. I also knew what she didn't say, that if I didn't step in, there wouldn't be a holiday. And the absence would be noticed. Not by those who mattered, but by those who loved to whisper. So I said, "I'll take care of it," like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. I didn't roast a turkey or peel potatoes over the sink. I didn't search Pinterest for side dish hacks. I called a private catering service I'd worked with during one of my company's luxury auction events in Chicago. They specialized in intimate, high-end dinners for collectors, custom menus, wine pairings, professional plating, even tablescaping. The bill was nearly $4,000. I paid it without blinking, using my company's secondary card. It wasn't about showing off. I just wanted something real. A meal that felt like care. Not lukewarm gravy and resentful conversation. I didn't tell anyone. I let them think I was just trying hard. Thanksgiving morning, I arrived early to set the table. The catering team followed an hour later, dressed in black, rolling in portable ovens and silver trays like a traveling orchestra preparing for a concert. They moved with quiet precision. One of them even brought candles in silver holders and polished every piece of cutlery until it gleamed. Chloe arrived just as they were adjusting the floral centerpieces. She caught one look and whispered to Mom, "Isn't she going a little overboard? Looks like she's trying to impress someone." I gave a soft smile. "No, Chloe, there's no one left to impress." Dinner was served at 5. The house filled with relatives, grandparents, cousins, 2 aunts who never remembered my birthday but always asked if I was dating. 20 people crowded around the table, gasping over every dish. "Did you make this gravy?" one uncle asked. "Tastes like it came from a restaurant." I nodded politely, pouring wine into their glasses. No one questioned the catering team in the kitchen. They just assumed I'd somehow figured it out. Halfway through dinner, while everyone was digging into pumpkin souffle and talking over one another, I slipped away upstairs. I had a live auction to monitor in Tokyo. My client was bidding on a Meiji-era gemstone set, and I couldn't afford to miss it. I opened my laptop in my old childhood room, now a storage space for things my parents never bothered to throw away. The scent of peppermint still lingered. I logged into the software, slipped in a Bluetooth earpiece, and connected with my assistant. We exchanged quick notes, current bids, authentication reports, timing. It was second nature now. This was my real world. Then Chloe barged in. She didn't knock. Just opened the door with the casual entitlement of someone who had never been told no. "Do you have an iPhone charger?" she asked, not waiting for a response. Her eyes flicked toward my screen and froze. Her gaze narrowed. She leaned in before I could move. "What is this?" I stood up, but she was already scooping the laptop into her arms. "Let's show everyone what you're doing up here," she said, her voice laced with mock cheer. "Chloe, don't," I said, following her down the stairs, but it was too late. She stepped into the dining room like it was a stage. "Hey guys," she called. "Look what Elaine's working on Thanksgiving no less." She spun the laptop around. The room fell into silence. There, glowing on the screen, were the open tabs. A business account balance of $12.6 million, a pending $400,000 authentication contract, and the latest internal report for Orem and Iris, stating quarterly earnings of over $4 million. You could hear a fork scrape against a plate. Mom broke the silence first with a nervous laugh. "Oh, come on now. She's probably just helping someone file some paperwork, right, sweetheart?" I stepped forward and closed the laptop gently, placing it on the sideboard. "No," I said, voice steady. "I'm the one signing that contract. I own Orem and Iris. We have 3 offices across 3 states. We work with museums, collectors, and high-net-worth clients. Everything you saw is real." For a moment, no one spoke. Then someone dropped their spoon. Aunt Marion gasped. My father leaned back, sweat beading on his forehead. Chloe gripped the table, her voice cracking. You have that kind of money? And you didn't tell us?" Mom's face turned pale. Dad turned red. Chloe's eyes welled with tears. "I'm still in school," she stammered. "Mom and Dad are in debt for me." I turned to them. "I've been transferring $7,000 to you every month for over 2 years, I said softly. "You never wondered where it came from?" My mother blinked rapidly, her lips twitching. "You have that kind of money," she whispered, "and you let us struggle?" Chloe broke. "I'm your sister. You're supposed to share. I have a right to know." I looked at her, then at all of them. These people who had once brushed off every achievement, laughed off my dreams, and accepted my money without question. The same ones who couldn't even be bothered to ask how I was doing, year after year. "Family," I said quietly, "doesn't mean carrying the people who've spent their whole lives looking down on you." Someone yelled something. Selfish, I think. Someone else said, duty. But I didn't stay to argue. I picked up my laptop, straightened my sleeves, walked toward the front door. No one tried to stop me. No one said they were proud. No one even thanked me. And as I closed that door behind me, all I could hear was my own heartbeat. Steady, unapologetic. Like a clock finally ticking in its own time. The days after Thanksgiving were eerily quiet, like the world was holding its breath. I thought maybe the storm had passed, that they'd take time to process what they saw, what they never cared to ask about, and sit with the truth. But I should have known better. The silence didn't mean peace. It meant calculation. It began with the phone calls. The first was from Mom, on a Sunday evening. Her voice was gentler than usual, laced with something almost like shame. "Elaine, I know things got a little tense, but your father and I were just surprised. Chloe's been overwhelmed. It wasn't the best time to learn that you've been, well, doing so well." She cleared her throat. "And Chloe's tuition is higher than expected. Parsons is private, and well, your father's salary can't quite keep up. Would you mind helping a little more?" "How much is a little more?" I asked, even though I already knew where this was going. She hesitated. "Then $7,000 a month, just until Chloe graduates. After that, she'll help the family too." The lie wasn't even subtle. Chloe hadn't completed a single degree in 6 years. She changed majors like outfits, followed by lavish vacations and Instagram captions about healing and growth. I hadn't said a word all this time. I just paid. Quietly. Predictably. Not anymore. I opened my business account and canceled the automatic transfers. All of them. Effective immediately. I didn't send a message. I didn't explain. If they didn't value the truth when it stood in front of them with numbers on a screen, they weren't going to appreciate a text explaining why I'd finally chosen myself. The fallout came fast. First, the passive-aggressive remarks. Chloe posted cryptic quotes on social media. "Not everyone with money has a heart," beneath a carousel of childhood photos. One of me holding her as a baby. One at her high school graduation where I stood off to the side, clapping quietly. The captions painted me as a cold-hearted ATM with no sense of family. Then came the calls. Dozens. Missed ones from Mom. Voicemails filled with tears and guilt. You're making everything worse, she sobbed in one. Lily's, Chloe's completely devastated. You've broken her trust. Dad, always more reserved, left a message that simply said, "This is not how a daughter treats her family." As if silence and exploitation were the hallmarks of love. When the calls didn't work, they tried shame. Sunday dinner became a courtroom. "You need to fix this," Mom said, her voice trembling with performative sadness. "Your sister is lost. You're the only one who can help her." Chloe looked at me across the table, mascara smudged, lips pursed in betrayal. "You lied to us," she whispered. "You let us believe you were struggling, that we were supporting you. I told my friends we paid your rent. I didn't flinch." "No," I said calmly. "You assumed, because that version of me made you feel superior." She blinked, stunned. "You don't know what it's like, Elaine, trying to make it in this world, trying to find yourself." "I know exactly what it's like," I cut in. "Because I did it. Without backup, without applause, without anyone asking if I was okay. You had a whole safety net. I had a mop, a scholarship application, and a peppermint-scented room I wasn't allowed to leave." The silence that followed was thick. Uncomfortable. Dad cleared his throat. "We're a family. Families share." "Funny," I said, "how that only started mattering after you saw the numbers in my bank account." Mom slammed her fork down. "How dare you speak to us like that? We raised you." "You tolerated me," I said. "Big difference." Someone muttered, "Selfish." Another said, "Ungrateful." But I didn't stay to argue. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and on my way out I turned back one last time. "If the only reason you want me around is money, then I'm done. I won't be your safety net anymore. I won't fund Chloe's dream interior design firm. I won't pretend I'm just scraping by so you can feel like saviors. I'm not hiding anymore." The door clicked shut behind me. No one followed. That night, my phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Distant cousins, old neighbors. Even the wife of Dad's friend who once told me I'd probably end up working retail. They all had opinions now. Some offered advice. Others hinted at how money changes people. A few were bold enough to ask for help. Just a small loan to get through a tough time. I forwarded them all to my attorney, Marcus. He was calm, professional, unfazed. "You need a clean break," he said. "Financially, legally, no loopholes." He drafted cease and desist letters and sent them out, every single one. At my request, he added one final line. "Love, if it exists, should never come with an invoice." Within days, my inbox went quiet. Not peaceful quiet, resentful quiet, the kind that simmers under the surface, waiting for the next opportunity to strike. But I was done waiting. I changed my phone number, set new security protocols at all 3 office locations, instructed my receptionist not to let anyone claiming to be family through the doors unless they had an appointment and a reason. I moved my personal files to an encrypted system, scrubbed my home address from every digital trail. I wasn't just creating boundaries, I was building walls. Not out of bitterness, but out of necessity. You can't keep giving to people who only see your worth in dollar signs. And the truth is, they were never really angry because I had kept my success a secret. They were angry because they didn't benefit from it. But the world didn't stop spinning. In fact, business boomed. A European client flew me to Madrid to consult on a royal jewelry exhibit. A New York museum reached out to collaborate on an archival collection from the 1700s. My name, once whispered only by the overlooked, was now printed on brochures, listed beside curators and historians with decades more experience. And still, I kept my dignity. Not once did I call my mother to tell her about it. Not once did I text Chloe to gloat, because success wasn't revenge. It was freedom. And freedom, once tasted, doesn't let you go back to the cage, not even if the people inside are calling you family. The morning after Marcus sent out the cease and desist letters, I woke to a strange silence. No buzzing phone, no guilt-laced voicemails, no backhanded texts from cousins who suddenly remembered I existed. Just stillness. The kind I hadn't known in years. I made coffee in my tiny kitchen and drank it slowly, savoring the quiet like a luxury I'd finally earned. Outside, frost clung to the window panes. The city moved on without me, as cities always do, but I had paused. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't running, wasn't proving, wasn't appeasing, wasn't apologizing for taking up space. It was the beginning of a different kind of life. I changed my passwords, updated business contacts, cleared my private mailing address from the company's database. I went over every client file, every employee record, and closed every possible opening that someone from my past might use to squeeze themselves back in. The boundaries weren't symbolic, they were structural. I wasn't just protecting a business anymore, I was protecting myself. That weekend, I signed a lease on a new headquarters in a secured office complex in the heart of downtown. Clean marble floors, soundproof walls, facial recognition access. It was far from the wobbly desk and buzzing lamp where I'd started, but I kept a few old things. My first magnifying loupe, my grandmother's swan hairpin, and a framed handwritten quote from Mrs. Donnelly that said, "Quiet doesn't mean small. It means deliberate." While the contractors prepared the new office, I called Grandma. She was the only person I hadn't blocked. When I told her everything, the reveal, the shouting, the silence, the fallout, she wasn't shocked. She just sighed into the phone, her voice calm and unwavering. "You finally did what you should have done a long time ago," she said. "They didn't see you. Not really. But you kept showing up. That's love. But love doesn't mean letting people walk all over you." I blinked back tears, not from sadness, but from the strange warmth of being understood. "Grandma," I said, "it's not that I didn't want to help. It's that they never once asked if I was okay. They just assumed I owed them." "I know, baby," she replied. "Family's supposed to lift you up, not pull you back down when you're finally learning how to fly." I asked her to come stay with me for a while. She packed a small suitcase and arrived 2 days later with a tin of butter cookies and the exact same sky blue cardigan she used to wear when I was a child. We sat at my dining table, sorting through a gem collection I had just acquired from Switzerland, and she smiled as I explained the unique clarity of an early Georgian diamond. "You know what I'm most proud of?" she said suddenly. I looked up. "What?" "That you stayed kind, even when they tried to make you hard." Her words hit me like a quiet lightning strike. Not loud, but unforgettable. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done proving, done shrinking, done pretending I wasn't tired just to keep peace at the table. That night, I went through my closet and pulled out every piece of memory I'd held onto. College rejection letters, old thank you cards from early clients, the lavender swan pin Grandma gave me when I turned 15. I lined them up on my bed, one by one, and looked at them not with pain, but with clarity. They weren't reminders of failure. They were proof of survival, of becoming. By spring, my new headquarters was open. Clean white walls, tall windows, a mahogany desk I chose by hand. The waiting room had velvet chairs and fresh orchids. My office was filled with warm lighting, soft music, and the scent of sandalwood. Clients loved it. Employees relaxed in it. I flourished inside it. One afternoon, I received a handwritten invitation to speak at an international conference in Paris on heritage and rare gemstone authentication. It wasn't just an honor, it was validation from the world I had once dreamed about entering. The keynote spot. My name on banners. My company listed among the most prestigious institutions in Europe. I sat with the invitation in my hands, stunned. Not because I didn't think I deserved it, but because I finally did. I wasn't afraid anymore of what my family would think. I wouldn't shrink for their comfort. I wouldn't dilute my accomplishments to fit their version of me. The girl who stayed quiet, who cleaned up after everyone, who wrote checks without questions. I booked my flight. The night before I left for Paris, I stood in my private gallery. The lights were low. The cases gleamed. And on the first shelf, right at eye level, sat the blue velvet box containing the lavender swan pin. I'd written a note months earlier and tucked it inside. For the girl who once felt invisible, you became the kind of light no one saw coming. I opened the box and read it again, just to remind myself. I was no longer hiding behind transfer payments or silence or the role of the dutiful daughter. I was no longer carrying the weight of a family who never wanted to carry me. I was my own person, my own legacy. That same week, I sat on a panel in Paris beside curators, historians, and global experts. I wore a soft navy suit and a white gold ring my grandmother once gifted me. I spoke about craftsmanship, about authenticity, about intuition. But beneath all the technical knowledge, what I was really saying was this: I know what it means to be overlooked, and I know the power of being the one who sees what others miss. After the panel, a young woman approached me with wide eyes and a trembling voice. "I've read your work. she said. You made me want to get into artifact restoration. I smiled. Not the polite kind, the real kind, the one that says, I understand. Because I did. I had become the woman I once needed, the woman I never thought I could be. And I had done it not through loud declarations, but through quiet persistence. When I returned home, Grandma was sitting on the porch with a mug of tea and a crossword puzzle. How was it? She asked. Life-changing, I said. She gave a satisfied nod, like she already knew. And in that still, quiet space, surrounded by things I had built, earned, and chosen, I realized something powerful. Silence is not weakness. It's grace sharpened into boundary. And I had finally chosen myself, not just in survival, but in celebration. I moved into my new home on the first Saturday of March, a modest, mid-century style villa tucked on the edge of Lake Mendota in Wisconsin. From the outside, it looked like any other quiet house on the street. Neutral tones, sloped roof, manicured shrubs. But inside, it was everything I had never been given. Peace, privacy, and a place where I didn't have to shrink. There was no welcome mat, no home sweet home plaque. Just the soft click of the security gate, the smooth scan of biometric locks, and the hush of the house as it accepted me. This was my sanctuary. No one knew the address. No one had the key but me. The villa had high ceilings, warm oak floors, and wide windows that looked out over the lake, where mist rolled in like something out of a painting. I bought every piece of furniture myself. Nothing flashy, just carefully chosen. A deep leather armchair that hugged you like a memory. A bookshelf made of reclaimed mahogany filled with classics and rare auction catalogs. A desk by the window where I worked late into the night under the glow of a vintage amber lamp. I installed a vault in the basement. Not the cold steel kind you see in movies, but a gallery-like room lined with velvet-trimmed drawers, fiber-optic lighting, and reinforced walls. A sanctuary for treasures, both historic and personal. Among them I placed a single blue velvet box. Inside was the swan hairpin, lavender stone, delicate and glinting like it had been waiting for this moment all along. Some nights I stood there in silence, staring at it, not because of its value, but because it was the first thing that ever made me feel seen. Grandma came to visit often. She baked, read, watered the plants. She was the only one who didn't ask questions about my life, not because she didn't care, but because she already knew. When we sorted new collections together, she'd nod at certain pieces, touch others gently, and sometimes just whisper, "Beautiful." It was more than approval. It was understanding. One evening, as we catalogued a rare 18th century emerald bracelet, she looked up and said, "You know what I'm most proud of, Elaine?" I expected her to say something about the house, the business, Paris, but she just smiled and said, "That you never let bitterness define you. You still moved forward with grace, even when they didn't deserve it." I didn't reply. I just reached for her hand and held it. Sometimes, silence said everything. In the months that followed, Orem and Iris expanded faster than I could have imagined. A renowned fashion designer contacted me to authenticate a personal vintage collection for an upcoming New York exhibition. A European museum invited me to collaborate on a restoration project, one that involved tracing a lost royal treasure from the Bavarian courts. I hired 2 new specialists, both women. Both sharp-eyed. Both as quiet and relentless as I once was. I trained them not just in technique, but in instinct. "Trust the story each piece is trying to tell," I said, "even if no one else hears it yet." I upgraded our Denver office, signed partnership contracts with 3 international auction houses. In a quarterly strategy meeting, my CFO, who once thought I was just the quiet founder, looked at me and said, "We're in a position to acquire a competitor in the South. If you're ready, this could be the next leap." I didn't answer right away, because it was never about power for me, or expansion, or being the biggest name in the room. It was about freedom. And I had already won that. One foggy morning, I sat by the second-story window of my home, watching the lake blur into the sky. Grandma was outside, still wearing her sky-blue cardigan, watering the rosemary bush. I was sipping black tea, reviewing the exhibit layout for a jewelry showcase I was curating in Florence. I thought back to the girl I had been at 8, standing alone on the porch, watching her parents drive away to see Chloe in the NICU. Back then, I thought being left behind meant I wasn't worthy. Now I knew better. Being left behind just meant I had more room to grow. One afternoon, while inspecting an incoming collection from Vienna, I came across a familiar shimmer, a pale lavender gleam beneath oxidized silver. I lifted it gently, a hairpin. Not the same swan design, but something close. I smiled, remembering the one tucked away in my vault. That evening, I reopened the blue velvet box. Inside, I placed a new note beside the hairpin. It said, "For the girl who once felt invisible, you became a light no one saw coming, and you never needed their eyes to shine." I closed the box, placed it in its display case, and exhaled. Later that week, I received an invitation to be interviewed for a documentary about women in antique arts, those who turned obscurity into expertise. The producer wrote, "We'd love to tell your story, how you built your company, what drove you, and what silence taught you." I said yes, not because I wanted fame, but because maybe someone else sitting in the corner of a peppermint-scented room needed to hear that quiet doesn't mean weak, that being overlooked doesn't mean being unworthy, that there's power in being the one who listens, the one who notices, the one who holds on to herself when everyone else tries to pull her apart. The final scene in that documentary was filmed in my vault. The camera lingered on the swan hairpin, then shifted to the note beside it. And for the first time, I spoke to the lens, not as the quiet girl, not as the giver no one thanked, not even as the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, but as Elaine Carter, the woman who built her own light and never asked anyone for permission to shine. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of Elaine's journey. Her story is more than just about wealth or success. It's a reminder that silence doesn't mean weakness, and love should never come with conditions. Sometimes the ones we give the most to are the ones who see us the least. But healing begins when we choose ourselves, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. If you've ever felt overlooked, underappreciated, or taken for granted, let this be a sign. You are allowed to grow beyond the expectations others place on you. Real love celebrates your light. It doesn't dim it to make others comfortable. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? Your support means the world to us. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story that speaks to the heart and reminds us what truly matters. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are the quiet ones we almost didn't hear. Let us know in the comments what lesson you're taking away from Elaine's story. Subscribe now to follow more journeys of truth, courage, and self-worth.